All right. And for those of you who are joining, if you're not a member of the South Dakota Healthcare Coalition and you are a South Dakota facility, there is a link on the screen that we're sharing. And we're going to take that down while we talk, so it's not distracting as we move forward. But if you are not a member, and you are a South Dakota facility, long-term care, hospital that hasn't made it yet, you're an emergency management organization in the state, EMS organization, please join the coalition. There's no charge. It takes about 5 minutes to fill out the form. There are committees that you can be part of, research committees and training committees and logistics committees and so on. We are a operational healthcare coalition, and we're going to talk a little bit about the difference between operational coalitions and planning coalitions and the transition that we made as a coalition. And we'll give it one more minute. We're up to 44 now. I'm trying to break 100, Maria.
All right.
I have a feeling we'll as people start hearing more about it on Twitter, they'll start popping in. But it's really important for anybody. I think this chat's going to be really important for anybody that that needs to meet any requirement, not just Appendix Z. I mean, you could throw any requirement up here: Joint Commission, NFPA requirements, any type of requirement for preparedness, and say, that the goal here today is not to do a presentation on CMS Appendix Z. The goal here today is to have a conversation about the difference between emergency preparedness for survey and emergency preparedness for actual events. So it is 10:05. I'm going to get kicked off. For those of you who don't know me, because we're expecting some new people on this chat today. My name is Greg Santamaria. I am the executive director of the South Dakota Healthcare Coalition. I have been in that role for about 7 months now. Prior to that, I was director of public safety for Sanford Health. In my work, it is my goal to enhance preparedness across the state of South Dakota. I work closely with our state partners and our federal partners, constantly trying to change the shape of emergency preparedness. And these fireside chats are kind of a new thing that we developed. This is, I think, our 5th month, or 4th or 5th month. And every month we have a new guest who comes in and talks about, all the cool stuff that they've done, and their expertise in emergency preparedness. And so this month's guest is interesting because about 3 years ago, I met Maria by disaster. We did not know each other prior to that. We were dealing with Hurricane Dorian. I was working with Sanford Health, and Maria was with Good Samaritan Society, and Sanford and Good Sam had just merged around that time. And there was just to give you guys a little bit of a background, Kissimmee Village in Florida is in central Florida in the Orlando area, and it sits kind of on this creek where all of central Florida kind of drains through. So in the summer, when there's nothing really going on, the creek looks very non-threatening. And then all of a sudden, when rain comes and storms come, that creek really fills up and floods out this large, expansive senior living center, nursing home, assisted living, and independent living. And at that time, Maria was the director of the senior skilled nursing facility. And we came down to start doing an evacuation, which, was the beginning of a year-long project for changing of plans and learning. So I will hand the floor to Maria. She can tell us where she's been since then, and then I'm going to come back and do kind of an intro to what we were really going to be talking about today, and we can take it from there.
Yep. Well, thank you, Greg. My name is Maria Griffin. I am an administrator for nursing homes. I have been in the long-term care arena probably close to 20 years, but as an administrator for the last 12. I have been, since I left Good Sam, I've ran a couple other buildings, but I've been mostly focusing on doing some interim work and just really trying to go in and focus on some facilities that may need a little extra help. So I am currently placed in Palatka, Florida, and not a lot of people may know where that is, but it's somewhere in between Gainesville and St. Augustine. So if anybody knows of the Florida Gators, that is Gainesville, and probably about an hour west, no, east of Gainesville. So I am currently there, and as you mentioned, I am getting ready for the hurricane that we are about to get slammed with. So this chat comes right on time because as we're going through our plan, there's so much more that we are looking at than just the plan, and the what ifs, and are we truly ready? Things that are, for as much as you try to be detailed, and in the plans that we have in our CMPs and in long-term care, they are detailed and they are quite extensive. However, there is a difference, as we saw when we had to evacuate Good Samaritan, of things that were not in the plan, that were not expected, that we had to think through. And, those kind of things just come with experience. If you've never if you've never been there, if you've never done that, you can't even imagine it. So that's kind of where I'm at right now, and looking forward to what we can share and let everyone know.
All right. Well, thank you, Maria, for I know that you've got some intensity building around you as we speak. So thank you for staying on with us during this. And I know the week is going to get harder and harder for everyone in Florida, and I've been in contact with folks down there. And what's interesting about the conversation that we're having right now is evacuations actually are occurring right now across the state. And I do know that, I've heard from some of our old friends over in Kissimmee that they're actually evacuating Kissimmee Village right now as well. So, these are critical times, and critical decision making has to occur in advance. And that's kind of the crux of what we're going to be talking about today. So I wanted to kind of get into the mode of what we want to do today, and there are two forms of preparedness. There is the preparedness for survey. And I went on and just to give everybody a heads up, these are pretty much unrehearsed conversations that we have with our guests. And for full transparency, Maria and I have had several conversations over the last few days about how we're going to present what we want to present. Like, we don't want this to be here's what Appendix Z is, and here's what you need to do, because when you go out on the internet, there is a ton of consulting firms and information on how to pass the CMS Appendix Z survey. And even when you go to the CMS site, there's a lot of information for surveyors on what to survey and so on. And if you look at the introduction to this particular webinar, I'm like, my comment was like, don't just check a box. Like, preparedness is not checking a box. Preparedness is a dynamic living thing. And for those of you, I'll divert a little bit here and go back into, this isn't just about Hurricane Dorian or Hurricane Ian. It's about overall readiness for large scale events. So I know, we're in South Dakota and we're talking right now about a big hurricane that's hitting Florida. A, because our guest speaker is from Florida and preparing for that. B, because it's a big national event right now. It's an emergency that is something we need to watch and learn from, because there are things that will occur during this hurricane that will occur here. Power outages, water loss, long-term downtimes, the ability to air condition in the summer or heat in the winter, and all of the different secondary events that occur. It's not just a bunch of wind and rain. It's the impacts of that wind and rain. And I just finished watching 5 Days at Memorial. So if you guys have Apple TV, Apple TV Plus just did a docudrama on the book 5 Days at Memorial, and it's an 8-episode, 8 one-hour episodes on what occurred during Hurricane Katrina at Baptist Memorial Hospital in New Orleans. And when you watch it, if you're a healthcare emergency manager, it's like kind of watching a sporting event. I was literally yelling at the TV going, why are you doing this? Why are you doing that? Like, the failure to evacuate early on was the crux of all of the issues that they had later on. The fact that the hospital had no evacuation plan, the fact that there was nothing in place, and the fact that I had done a lot of research on Hurricane Katrina's impact during my master's studies. The National Weather Service recommended evacuation of all high-rise buildings, and that was kind of ignored because, you know, the thought process always is, it will never happen to us. That kind of stuff happens to someone else. And so they use this term that drives me crazy. And they were like, we're in the middle of the storm zone. We are going to be hit hard. We're in New Orleans, we're in a bowl. And it's kind of like very similar to what Tampa is experiencing right now. And they decided to not evacuate. They didn't have a plan for it. And they made it through the hurricane relatively well, in the sense that, the storm passed, they lost a lot of glass, and so on, but everybody was kind of good until the levees broke. And this is what we talk about with these secondary events that occur. So what are the key response factors or response failures that occur here? I can teach anyone how to pass. Yes, Carol, the documentary was based on the book. I can teach anybody. I can go to a facility and tell you how to pass survey, as can Maria. Maria is, that's what she does. She knows CMS probably better for me in long-term care, and I'm not going to dominate the conversation, but biggest failures that occur since I've been in emergency management, and if we can eliminate this one problem, if somebody can come up with, and I've been trying, this solution to the failure of communications, I'll be living on a boat somewhere outside of the, Bimini Islands or wherever, hanging out in tropical weather for the rest of my life, because the money you can make on fixing that problem would really enhance preparedness. But there's a lot out there that we do wrong. And one of the things is that we plan to survey rather than plan to impact. And anybody that knows me more than 15 minutes knows that my commentary is when someone says, oh, Joint Commission is coming or CMS is coming, I'm like, I don't really care about Joint Commission. I never have, because if I write a plan, my plan is going to be ready for the hurricane or the tornado or the big storm. And if I'm ready for that, then I'm going to blow away my Joint Commission survey. And unfortunately, the problem that occurs is a lot of the consulting firms and the training is really pushes toward hitting the elements of performance for Joint Commission and the elements of performance for that, for CMS. And that results in a real failure to plan. And then it's kind of a deer in the headlights failure to act when something's really happening. And action prior to impact is what creates success. Waiting things out, in conversations I've had over the years, like, what are you planning on doing? This storm is looming on you. Well, we're hoping, that it doesnand hit us. Well, all the spaghetti models are telling you it's going to hit you. Yeah, but we're hoping. We're gonna hang out. We're gonna wait. We're gonna see. And it's true. It's We joked around during the hurricane, and I promise I'll shut up after this comment. We joked around during Hurricane Dorian that watching a hurricane is like being behind someone on the interstate who's signaling right, but then turns left. And because all of the storms and all of the projections say this is going to happen, this is going to happen, and then the storm has a mind of its own, and a wind shear occurs, or something develops, or even in South Dakota, new lines of storms occur. And so being proactive and having plans that are actually bigger than your core elements are extremely important. Comments like, we can get it together, we're resilient, we have a great community, are all good, but a great community without a plan, when communication fails, is just another community that can't connect. So Maria, what is, if you, as you go through your planning and so on, what are some of the stumbling blocks that you're seeing now, that kind of contradict Appendix Z versus what you've experienced in the past and what you're experiencing now?
So one of the things, just to kind of go back to what you were talking about with the, with the planning and the doing, as long-term care facilities, and our requirement is to do a certain number of exercises per year. So we have to do 2 exercises. We have to write about them. We have to submit them. Our plans are looked at annually, and that's all fine and dandy. But, when it comes down to it, you've got to get everybody together. You got to get either at least at the very least, the main players, who are all of your different departments that you need on board. And then you hope that you can pull in some of the other staff. For a large scale or a complete building wide scale exercise that you would need to actually be able to simulate any type of emergency that you may have to do, regarding whether it's a power outage, or you have, no water, sewage, or whatever it may be that you have to do an evacuation for, or act in any different way than your normal fire drill. It takes a lot of manpower, it takes time, it takes effort that on your day-to-day, you have very little. Everything else must still go on. So your day-to-day work, it still has to continue, yet you have to plan and be able to set aside this time and this, and really push forward the importance of doing these exercises. And at the end of the day, when we are, getting everything else done, prepping for everything, and like you said, prepping for survey and getting our books done, getting pen on paper so that we meet our requirement of our tabletop or whatever it may be, it's not enough. It's not sufficient. We're not ready. And that's really, at the end of the day, what we're finding right now, as I am going through getting ready for this hurricane, and what may happen through this hurricane. We are, we're sheltering in place right now. We are, just gonna ride the storm out. We're inland in the middle of the state, so we don't have to actually, really plan on doing an evacuation. However, what if a tree falls on the building? What if our generator fails? What if, there's sewage backup? Our building, and this is where that hazards risk assessment that we have to do is very important. It's not just considering, okay, well, there may be a 2% chance of this happening. You really got to look at what's around you. I am covered, the building, our building is set actually across the street is a very large cemetery, and so is next door. A few years back, this particular building, because of the age of the cemetery, when they had a flood, heavy rains and whatnot, bodies washed up onto the, out of the graves and rolled in onto the, the pavement in the side, into the, obviously not into the nursing home, but, in the parking lot. So you got to take all those things into consideration. I would have never thought that that actually could happen, but it's happened. It happened there. And who's not to say that that may not happen again? So, so we have to look at all the different possibilities. At this point, we've got everything in-house. We're ready for sheltering in place. But the real question is, would we be able to, evacuate, and where are we going? Do we have the places? Even when you're looking at your reciprocal agreements, those may not work when push comes to shove. We've already been seeing some administrators that are asking, who's got beds available? Who can actually take us in? Because they don't, and they're posting it on Facebook because they don't have any other means of communications. You can't sit there and just call every single nursing home down the line. And, sometimes you have to do that. However, they've resorted to something like that, to where they're asking my reciprocal agreements, and you get 3 or 4 or however many you think that you can house in each different facility. If you're a 60-bed facility like I am, I've got 65. Well, I don't have to worry about that many residents. But if you're a 180-bed facility, then you've got to have 5, 6, reciprocal agreements, and can they house you. And in a situation like we are right now with the whole state of emergency, and the nursing homes along the coastlines, they're struggling trying to find where to go, because the plan, it's failing them. So, that's really, one of the main things that we're prepping for right now is the what ifs. And, sometimes you just find yourself in a situation where, you got to do the best that you can with what you've got. So, we're kind of prepping is to trying to figure out, okay, if we had to evacuate, do we have trucks, large moving trucks that we can put, wheelchair, mattresses, or cots, and just like we did a Good Sam, and to be able to account for all the extra time it takes. It doesn't just take, you can't just say when you're doing your plan, 72 hours before, in 5 hours, I'm going to have everybody load up and all the equipment load up and everything in and ready to go, because it actually takes more time than that. So, I digress.
No, that's exactly a point that I wanted to get to, was that one of our experiences, and this is anywhere, when things that are in the plan, things that you don't think of in the plan, and you made a really good point. When we do a drill, it's very easy to say, well, we've only got 50 residents, so there's 25 here's 25 nursing homes that are within a 100-mile radius. We're going to send 2 to each, and we're sure they can take them, or we'll and the other thing that's always an assumption is that our transportation assets will be there, that there'll be enough EMS. Right. I know in South Dakota we're like, well, we'll just EMS will do this for us, and then when we really do the time studies and the transportation studies, we realize that that we just can't. We don't have the transportation assets. And one of the things that I know that we experienced down during the evacuation there is that as we evacuated the long-term care facility, we realized that when you bring these people to another location, you do have to bring their wheelchairs. The med carts need to go. There's a bunch of other things that need to go. You can't just throw these residents in a bus, which we were able to do. We were able to put most of them on a bus. Then you needed trucks to move stuff. And I'll never forget going, and and the guys that were loading the trucks didn't know that the wheelchairs could fold up. And I remember seeing that all the wheelchairs parked in like it was a ferry. And I was like, guys, if you fold them up, you could fit like 10 times more wheelchairs in there. But you made a really good point, because loading and unloading times for long-term care residents, particularly the memory care, was almost as long as the transport time from one point to another. It took over an hour, I remember, to unload some of the vans there. And when we were bringing people back, where there was less pressure on us because the storm was over, but it took a long time to get those people going. And that is, when we talk about the time frames, it's always better to do it before. And when that there's a potential for flash flooding or whatever. Now, a lot of times, particularly here in South Dakota, that is like, I would deal with a hurricane, as a preference over dealing with a rapidly developing thunderstorm that turns into multiple tornadoes, or this derecho, which kind of came out of nowhere, because you have 3 or 4 days to really think about what you're going to do and make your connections and kind of work your evacuation. And for the people listening, there's really 2 types of evacuations. There's the well-organized, I have a 2 days evacuation, where you can do what we were able to do down in Kissimmee and figure all these things out, because I'm sure there's people on the call that's like, wow, we never really thought about having to move med carts and wheelchairs and beds and mattresses and all this other stuff, because those places that they're going to aren't set up to surge the way we think they are. So we had to bring mattresses and use space that wasn't normally utilized for I have a bug flying in front of me, a gnat, so I'm not having a seizure. Using space that wasn't utilized, and we had to provide that, including things. How are we going to feed people? Do you have MOUs for feeding folks? So that's an organized evacuation where you can think through all of those pieces. And then there's the disorganized evacuation where 1 minute you're sitting in your nursing home, and the next minute a tree falls down and takes out a portion of your building. And I have I put up on the screen from CMS some core EP rule elements, and some of the risk in the planning that their expectations are. So not to get into the weeds of the actual reg, but the things that we need to prepare for. What are your likely hazards? So in Florida, you do have also, above and beyond hurricanes, some pretty intense thunderstorms and straight line winds like they do here in South Dakota. But care-related emergencies, what if we can't continue to get supplies? What if we can't continue to do care because the facility is broken down, the HVAC system is down, the AC is down, and what are your triggers for evacuation? Equipment and power failures, communication failures. How are you going to, if you can evacuate, how are you going to reconfigure your facility, and what local facilities are available for you to relocate patients to, or residents to? And I used to, back in the day, I used to work with our accreditation team, and I used to go out and do surveys, life safety surveys, and I used to survey emergency management plans. And when I started looking at evacuation plans, most every small facility would say, well, we're going to evacuate to the high school gymnasium, and we're going to take care of people there. And I would ask, how are you going to do that? How are you going to get these people from point A to point B? And once you're there, how are you going to care for them? And it's a good plan in an immediate evacuation, but then you need to have the secondary, you got to get them to safety, but then you got to get them to definitive care. And that's where a lot of those plans fall short. They think once, it's written in the plan, once I get them to the gym, my job is done. Well, take 60 senior citizens who are, and one of the things that people, long-term care people will know this, but the average is that 85% of people who are in long-term care facilities have some form of disability. So you're dealing with a fragile population that you're moving from their normal digs to something completely abnormal. And there's a bunch of research out there. And you and I, Maria, were talking about this the other day about the rapid physical and emotional decompensation when people are moved from their area of regular activity to a new area. So,
Yeah.
so these are things that need to be considered during planning. And so in your experience as after leaving Good Sam and going on, are you finding when you review these emergency plans that there's a level of readiness to that extent?
No, and I've been through a few facilities. I can't say that in 12 years I've been around, the block and back with facilities, but I've seen a handful and I've worked on a handful. Pretty much that is one of the things that when I go into a facility, I look at and I review. And they're, pretty standard, just meeting the regulatory, requirements. And, one of the things, like we were mentioning before, that, it kind of, it's still pertinent to this day. However, there have been some updates to the requirements. The emergency preparedness plan was originally put together in 1994, 1995. There haven't been very many updates since. So, year after year, no matter where you go, at least here in Florida, I've seen it's pretty standard. We just say the same thing and you change the people's names. But no, I think that since now there has to be a little bit more detailed, especially with now that COVID has come into play, and there has been the new updates with the the infectious diseases that you have to add on to the plan to prepare for those. I'm hoping will be a little bit more of a detail thought process put into making these plans. But at the end of the day, so far, I've seen it's pretty much standard.
And I think part of it, I think there's a couple of parts as to why it occurs. Right now, healthcare across the board is facing a major crisis in staffing. People are just barely making it when it comes to staffing. And now, we're like, okay, but you still have to do your emergency planning and people kind of cut to listen, we are barely surviving every day in regards now, now we have to, you expect us to do this emergency planning, and how can we jump on board with a drill that will get us through, and count as a drill. We had a severe storm and the derecho counts, but we can do an after action report for that. And we activated the South Dakota Healthcare Coalition, activated post that event to do some situational awareness, but there wasn't a lot of stuff that occurred there. We've had some nursing homes that have had some issues over the summer that we assisted with, including some flooding, and one, a car drove into their gas inlet, which was interesting. So they had a little bit of a gas leak in their location. But for the most part, it's tornado damage and so on. And we've been lucky in a sense that, it's a onesie twosie situation where if we had to move, we were be able to. And one of the things that for South Dakota folks, that the South Dakota Healthcare Coalition does, that Maria was talking about before, in facilities, going out and having to go out on social media and say, who can take my patients and who can take my residents? I have no other outlet. The South Dakota Healthcare Coalition, which is now, I'm going to plug this is why you need to go onto the website and join the coalition, is we do that for you. We will activate in a large scale event, and we will do bed updates and find out where the beds are. We can't guarantee transportation, but we can guarantee that we can find out where beds are. And if you're an affected facility, we can assist you in rebedding your folks. And we'll work with transportation agencies and we'll work with EMS to make that happen. But it's also an expectation on each and every one of the facilities, excuse me, to be able to know that and to be able to reach out. So, because you're a long-term care facility, doesn't mean you're not welcome in the coalition. In fact, in our strategic plan for this year, we expect to have every long-term care facility in the state as a member of the coalition by the end of the budget year, which is July of actually the end of June next year. So it's a hefty goal, but we want to make sure that, our long-term care facilities are covered as well. We're working with some of the most vulnerable populations in our states. And, we need to get beyond the fact that, oh, well, I'm going to jump on board with this drill. And, the county is going to be doing a hazmat drill. So we're just going to communicate with them and we're going to count it as a drill for the year. Well, that helps you pass your community preparedness and working with your community, but it doesn't help you at all in understanding how an event might impact you.
Yep.
And being part of the coalition, we will include you in exercises and we will create scenarios that will impact you. But there's a lot of real events that are occurring, like what's occurring right now in Florida, that we can learn from. And again, it's more than just checking a box. It's more than saying, well, we're going to sit this storm out, because sitting the storm out, like Maria said, you can lose your generator. What if you lose your generator? And I'll tell a quick story and then we'll move on to another important topic. But as we were preparing to move during Hurricane Dorian, as we were preparing to move folks from Kissimmee and Daytona, because the storm was coming in on the ocean side, the east side of the state, we had to move 2 locations into one, DeLand, which was internal. And they had a building that they were deconstructing. So that building was half deconstructed. It was disconnected from the power grid, or the transfer switch was disconnected from the generator. I think it was still up on the power grid. But it didn't have a generator attached to it anymore because they were dismantling the building. So the transfer switch was gone. And we had to get a generator up there because we knew that there was a big possibility that we would lose power. So the storm, I believe, hit on a Tuesday, and it was getting Sunday into Monday when we decided that we got a generator to attach to the building. We had to get an electrician in the city power to come in, but we couldn't get a transfer switch to wire a transfer switch in. So we had to make a decision on whether or not we were going to pull it off of city power and plug the generator in, or wait till the power went out and then do it. So my recommendation was, well, why would we do that in the middle of a storm when the electric company may not be available? Let's just do it Monday morning. Let's get everybody together, disconnect it from the power grid and plug it into the generator. And that actually went off without a hitch. It took about 3 hours to get the job done, and we had that building completely wired, running off of generator power before the storm ever hit. And then when everybody was celebrating, I put my hand up and I threw this at them. I was like, all right, what if that generator fails? And I got a lot of boos from the crowd. But I mean, those are things you need to think about is, parking another generator, getting now a second generator right next to that generator on standby, just in case. And we were able to do that. And when you're on generator power, you also have to have a constant flow of fuel and have your fuel MOUs up and running. So it's creative thinking in advance that prevents those big things from happening.
Well, and not just that, but I mean, what are you going to plug into the generator? One of the things that I'm seeing with my building, we're blessed that it's a big building because it used to be a hospital. However, because of the age of the building, there's not a lot of red plugs. So, there are updates that still need to be made to the building. But in the meantime, we've got what we've got, and we got to, figure out how we're going to work with that. And, and as it is right now, we are powering the area where the residents are. And we have a whole well, the first floor actually is where the offices are, and there's a lot of good space. And the second floor is where the patients are. But right now we can't fully air condition the second floor, or I'm sorry, the first floor. So the patients are good. Everybody that would be upstairs would be good on the generator. But unfortunately, I can't open up my facility to other buildings, as a receiving facility, because I wouldn't have a way to keep them cool. So in the right temperature, or to be able to provide for extras for them. So, so even down to that, you gotta take a look at that, those small pieces that you don't really think about.
And, and I know it causes, from a receiving facilities perspective, one of the other things that we experienced in evacuation on the receiving end was coordination between leadership.
Yeah.
And moving that forward. So, I mean, you would think that would be something easy, but it was never in the plan as to, as we move the leaders over, who's in charge of what. And these are things that need to be worked on, I think at the coalition level. So I think, from the perspective of what we did during Hurricane Dorian, it was all within one organization, and it was kind of easy to work through that. But when you are moving people from your facility, and this could be a hospital to another hospital, it could be, you have a dozen different things to think about when you're evacuating a hospital to another hospital. It's, the patient charts have to go, the patient meds have to go, the physicians who may not have rights in one hospital now have to go take care of, like, how does that, all of that is never discussed really, because, in large scale facilities, particularly in hospitals, they always talk about moving, well, we'll never have to evacuate this facility is always the first one, because the only way we'll ever have to evacuate is if this or this happens. And then the question arises, well, what if this or this happens? We talk a lot now about facility decompression. We've been doing a lot of decompression exercises here in South Dakota, where we move people from the main tertiary care centers to long-term care centers and critical access hospitals, so we can make more rooms for our surge patients. But we don't, we don't, we're as guilty as everybody else. We don't really talk about evacuation to the maximum of all the different needs, including the leadership roles of merging people from one organization to another. We did one drill one time that had nothing to do with an evacuation, but it was an air crash exercise on the helipad at Sanford Health in Sioux Falls, and we made it that it was an Avera helicopter that crashed on our pad. So it forced a merging of leadership from two competing health systems to come together and work out, what was going to happen. We had fatalities. I was a fatality. There was a dummy with my ID on it somewhere along the line. But these are things that, when you go outside the box, we may be competitors, when the sun is shining, but all of a sudden we're all in this together when the flood is coming, and, Noah goes floating by on his boat, waving to us, and we're still sitting there. And that's kind of the thing, is like, that's not covered in our plans.
Right.
And these are key aspects of response and preparedness that we need to think about. And I'm looking at this thing, there's core EP elements in the communication plan, and systems to contact staff, but how do we communicate with our partners, but even more our competitors, who become partners in the middle of a crisis? And these are things that I don't expect you to have an answer to. I know that we went through it and worked through it at DeLand, but what do you think is a good way to manage that?
Well, I think that right off the get-go, and it may be a little different for me because I've already been in it. So I think about these things when I go to a new place. But I do reach out to the local emergency management team and, to see who, how, and in what circumstances, who do I have to contact? What do I have available? And, hey, I'm the new kid in town. So I was in Clearwater earlier this year, and they do have a very active coalition for emergency preparedness, emergency management. And I was happy to see that, being that they're on the coast. And then, we do also one have here in Orlando. But then you go into a small town like where I'm at right now, and it's almost non-existent. So, so you have to have that communication. I think definitely as administrators or as leaders, when we go into a new place, just reaching out and saying, just like you would introduce yourself to your marketing people, to whoever's going to feed you as a potential client, say, hey, I'm the new person here, and just say hello and just be out there. Being able to actually register and be part of the coalitions that are the local coalitions is a very good idea. I am, totally in for that. I can tell you that I've even in a state of emergency, it's too late. It has to be done beforehand, because like yesterday, I was just placing calls just to check in with the emergency management, with other nursing homes around the area. And I know everybody's busy, but I wanted to leave messages and just check in. I didn't get any callbacks. I wasn't really expecting, although I did say, call back if you can. But that there wasn't any callbacks. I don't know if I'll have a callback today, but it's the time of the storm right now. Everybody's preparing, everybody's busy. It's not the time to do your introduction and say, hey, I'm here, don't forget me. So.
And that's a key point. Being partners, and I always say it's always better to call a person by their first name and know who that is, instead of saying, so here, when I was at Sanford, for example, Kevin from Avera, who was my counterpart at the time, Sanford and Avera are competing health systems. You don't want to say, well, I need to call that emergency manager from Avera and see what he's doing. It's Greg's going to call Kevin. And you have that personal relationship, and that comes with that doesn't come within the stress of an event, because anybody that knows me knows that I can get into great detail about the decision making and stress of an event, and we won't go there today. That doesn't come with the stress of an event. It comes with partnering up regularly, being a member of the coalition, going to your coalition meetings, participating in drills, being active in that part of preparedness, because once everybody knows everybody else, you're more willing to say and feel their pain. It's like if some random stranger calls you and says, I'm in a nursing home 20 miles from here, and water is coming, can you help us? And you're like, well, I have my own problems, and I have water coming at me too. It's a little bit different when everybody knows everybody, and it's more of a for lack of a term, familial relationship. So, and I know that in our coalitions here, the healthcare facilities, when we have our interregional, everybody comes and everybody is joking around, and we have our annual meeting and people know each other. We created that actually a couple of years ago, where we would have our interregional meeting, and then everybody would kind of go out to dinner and like in different places. And it's in Chamberlain, South Dakota. There are not many places to go. But then we came up with this idea and said, why don't we just have a social? Like on the first night of the conference, like let's just have a social and let's feed everybody and have one big party. And we played volleyball and we had a tiki bar, and and everybody got to know each other. And having those socials every year kind of brings everyone together. And then you become more in tune to each other's needs. and more willing to help. And the coalition here, like I said, is kind of a one-stop shop for communication. We'll send communication out. We start sending situational awareness out. We ask facilities what they need. We ask other facilities what they have, and so on. So operational here in South Dakota, if you notice, I put the slide back up to join the coalition, because, you know, these are the things that the more members of the coalition we have, the more assets we have, and the more assets you have as a member of the coalition. It doesn't cost you anything to be part of our coalition. We are setting a model up right now that we'll be presenting at the National Healthcare Preparedness National Coalition Conference in Anaheim, that talks about how we transition from just a planning facility, a planning group, to an operational group. And we're an operational support structure here in the state of South Dakota, with our own command center and our own communication. And we're still in our, I won't say we're infancy, but we're toddlers. We're still in our toddler stage, but it's really important from a perspective of readiness beforehand.
Yeah.
And understanding that. So I think that, you know, so we have 7 minutes left. So Maria, I'm going to ask you the tough question. If there was one thing,
Okay.
right now, sitting in your chair right now with Hurricane Ian bearing down on you, if there was one thing or two things that you wish were in place that are not in place right now, what would you think they are, and how would you change that? And I know that's putting you on the spot, but I know you have answers.
Yeah. Well, definitely, like I said, you know, we're good to go for sheltering in place. My worry at this point is the evacuation piece. Will we have somewhere to go? Yeah, we have, you know, again, our agreements. That was part of my calls yesterday, just to double check and make sure that they're okay and still able to take us in. But just making those connections. The other thing is the transportation. I'm actually having an ad hoc meeting in a little while with my team and my medical director for a QAPI meeting, where we're going to discuss specifically, okay, how many people do I need if I needed non-emergency transport or an ambulance and whatnot to transport people out of the facility? Or would they be available all day? How many would I need to transport the, you know, 13, 14 residents that I have that are gonna need that service? And is that available? Well, we're a small town. There's only 2 nursing homes and 1 hospital and 1 transport company. So how are we actually going to get that done? You know, that I worry about that. You know, we've called truck moving companies and storage companies to see if they've got U-Hauls available. We've got that. We're ready to go with that. But, you know, really right now, my worry is, would we be able to transport the residents? You know, push come to shove, you know, we'd use cars or regular cars if we need to, but you know, I mean, you don't want to put yourself in that position. You don't want to put the residents in that position. It's a lot of stress on a resident to move them around from one place to another. You know, we see that when you have people that move into the facility, whether it be with dementia or a hospice patient, there's a rapid decline after that, or, you know, some sort of decline. So, you know, you don't want to fly off the seat of your pants with that. But at the same time, you know, I have a small van for the facility, but, you know, like I said, we're a small facility and, you know, I don't have a huge van to transport people. So, you know, that transportation is a major worry for me right now. God forbid anything happens where I do have to move them. But, you know, that's one of the things that is just kind of lingering in the back of my mind at this point.
You know,
So,
and transportation is always an issue. And I know that we, you know, just to get into that, because you sparked something, another memory of Hurricane Dorian was the, you know, the turnaround time. Like I said, you know, loading the buses, the transport vans, the wheelchair vans and so on. Some had lifts, some didn't, but loading them up, getting them on the road, getting them to D-land, unloading them, and then the trip back. I think that we did an ultimate time study during another, or I requested a time study during another exercise after the fact when we were doing our post event. But it was about 5 hours, I think, to get a van from point A to point B. And and one of the things that people need to think about when they're using vans and doing transport is how many drivers do you have? One of the things that came out of that was we didn't even think of it till after the fact when I came back and I interviewed everybody independently. Maria, and you were one of those people, but we interviewed the entire staff that was involved in it. And one of the things that a lot of the maintenance guys were saying was that nobody really realized that they were doing all the driving, and they were doing 2 and 3 trips. And you have people who are physically exhausted. They're loading the truck, the van, they're driving the van, they're unloading the van, driving back, they're doing it again. And you have to be aware. And one of the questions that I asked, in the aftermath was, how many CDL drivers actually exist on campus that are licensed to drive these vans? And do you have an MOU to get more CDL drivers? I mean, you may have enough vehicles, but you may not have enough drivers. And if you don't have enough vehicles, do they, what's the local school bus company doing? Like, and have long-term care facilities here in South Dakota reached out to local school bus companies and said, can you provide us? It's not optimal. It doesn't have a lift and it's going to require some work, but it's better than, a single vehicle and putting people in the car. And then another thing that, that I know everybody thinks about doing is prior to the storm hitting, if there's an event that we know is going to strike, like an ice storm or something that's going to be devastating here in South Dakota, contacting family members and evacuating those people back to their families it is another way of doing things. We don't have time to get into independent living.
No, but I mean, even in a long-term care setting, I mean, we did that already. We called starting on Friday. We called to give residents, family members a heads up. Say if you want to bring your loved one home, then you're more than welcome to. We just can't shelter them, the family members. But yeah, I mean, that is something that we do rely on when it comes down to evacuation.
And then, the difference between in our post-event work is that we learned, obviously, there's a difference between, skilled nursing, assisted living, which really are, in that circumstance are treated the same. They all fall under CMS. And then independent living falls under the Fair Housing Act. So there are different sets of rules that, like, if facilities have an independent living on their campus, you can't, as we learned at our town hall meetings, independent living people are very independent and they don't want to be told what to do. I made a lot of friends in that first town hall meeting. And but that's a whole nother thing, is like, you have assisted livings, you have skilled nursing facilities, and then you have independent living, and there are, even though they are they're independent living folks, they we need to help them with their planning as well. So there's a lot of work,
and they still have healthcare needs, and we found that a lot too. And in even opening up of the shelters and trying to evacuate the independent living residents or people that lived in that community, was all the medical needs that they had. And did they have enough medications? Did they have, the oxygen? Could they plug in somewhere for the oxygen? I mean, the limited walking. There's, a lot of people that take care of the elderly at home. So, it's a lot of things that you don't think through until you find yourself in that position.
And we found, I know we're running out of time here, but we found 3 major categories of independent living folks. There was the category 1 was people who had all the assets they needed to go wherever they needed to go and didn't need any help at all. Category 2 was they needed help. They wanted to go to a shelter, but they were missing one asset. They didn't either have a place to go, or they didn't have transportation, or they didn't have money to stay somewhere. And category 3 were the people that were like, you can't tell me what to do. I'm not going to do anything you tell me to do. I'm going to stay here and shelter in place. And and I've lived in this community for, 70 years, and I'm going to live through this storm as well. And you have to, those were the three big categories that we worked on. And those folks in the middle are the ones you really need to do the work with. Do they need to be in a special needs shelter? And then you start working with your emergency management folks in identifying people and getting them registered for, special needs shelters. So when those shelters come up, they get automatic notifications and so on. So there is so much work out there. And Maria, I'll leave you, I'll let you have the parting words, and then I'll close out, and we'll take it from there.
Yeah. Well, I mean, if there's anything just to really stress from this is we can't really wait until we have the emergency. You have to just really practice, take the time. I know it's a hassle. I know it takes a lot out of the day. It may even take time, from working things on the weekends at home. And I know that nobody likes to do that. However, if you can't close the door and just sit and dedicate, some quality time to really planning and looking at your plans, emergency plans, it's just not a situation you want to put yourself into. As an administrator or leader, you're responsible for a lot of lives, not just the people you care for, but, the team members that you have, the managers and everybody else. You're the one that they're looking to for answers. And, that's the one thing that's an expectation. And you may not know all the answers, and, that's okay, but you better be prepared. And, it's not one of those things that it's to take lightly. Come into your buildings, where if you go into a new place, wherever you go, where if you haven't spent the time even at your own buildings right now, just going through and comb through that plan and make sure that even if you don't put the extra details of how something it would be, but just make it at least bullet points of possible things. So at some point or another, you have something to go back to and say, okay, well, I thought about, how are we going to transport that, or needing extra cars, or maybe, I need to slowly work on getting extra agreements, or, where can we go if there's no other nursing homes to go to? So, just really start thinking about those what ifs.
Yep. And I'll leave everybody with this thought. About 15 years ago, I ran into a risk manager. I was trying to work on a project, and I had made a bunch of recommendations that would have cost a good amount of money. And I was told, the funny part about risk management is that I can make a decision to not implement anything that you're asking me to implement here. And in a year from now, if nothing bad happens, I'm a hero. And he said, but if something bad happens, I lose my job. So the fact of the matter is, it's actually bigger than that. Okay, because when we make decisions to wait it out, when we make decisions to fail to plan or fail to act inappropriate, it's not us that it's costing, it's the people that we're dedicated to serving. Okay, and and the last thing anybody wants to do is be responsible for the deaths of the people that that they're protected, or sworn to protect. And when you go back to my original statement about this 5 days at Memorial, I think I really believe that docudrama should be required viewing for anybody that is in emergency preparedness for healthcare, because at the end of the day, the decision making that occurred in that event cost the lives of 46 people in that facility. And if appropriate decisions were made, I'm not going to Monday morning quarterback, but I will. And if appropriate decisions were made and evacuations, and Maria, you were there, like at the end of the day, we could have gotten away with not evacuating Kissimmee Village during Hurricane Dorian. We could have we could have
Mhm.
not pulled the trigger.
Yeah.
But I woke up at 5 o'clock in the morning that morning and said, and had this moment. And I was like, I went to the command center and I said, we got to get Maria's people out of there. We got to start right now. We can't take the risk. And there was a consensus right there on the spot that it was the right thing to do. And it's always better to get everybody out, you know, and get everybody to safety and have nothing happen. And be able to move them back. All we needed to do is get him to a safe space, sit out a
Yeah.
storm, and bring him home. And
Right.
we did. It was a perfect move. And it worked out really well. And you know, the other way to do it is do nothing. And if one thing goes wrong, you're in a total different person, a total different world. So, you know,
Yeah.
that takes planning, that takes training, that takes education, that takes partnerships. And you know, and that's what we're all about. So I want to thank you, my friend, for coming and talking to me and our people in the middle of this
Yeah,
crisis
my
that you're about
pleasure.
to, you know. And a mutual friend and I were talking this morning, and they were like, you really want to be down in Florida right now, don't you? I said, more than anything else. I said, this is what I do. And I'm like chomping at the bit, sitting here watching this going, I just, you know, I would be so at home right now, being down there and, you know, and working this, but, you know, I don't do that anymore in this role. But, you know, it is what we do. And you know, it's really energizing when people are doing it right. So Maria, thank you for your time, and I know that you have a lot to do, and I know you're doing it right. So and you know how to find me if you need help. And again,
Yes, sir.
on behalf of the coalition, once again, if you haven't joined, you have, you know, a little more time to get up there and join our coalition. On behalf of the coalition, I want to thank you for your time. And you know, we'll stay in touch, and you know, reach out if you have any questions or need anything, and I'll do the same.
Yes, my pleasure. Thank you for having me today.
Thanks for being here, and good luck. Stay safe. And we'll talk
Thanks.
to you soon.
Will do. Thanks. Bye-bye.
Thank you, everybody. We're going to stop recording now.